All right. Hey, welcome everybody. This is the last session for this spring or this beginning of summer. So this is actually the certification, the exam prep. And after this session, so at the end of this session, you'll get access to the registration of the exam. So I will be sharing that with you. And we have a lot of content for today. We'll go through as much as we can. You will get all the slides that we have. So don't worry about it. If we can't get through all the questions that we have, it's not a problem, but let's try to cover as much as we can. So this is the exam prep, and this is for Mimmit Koodaa Women Who Code webinar series 2024, and this is for the practitioner exam. And I think most of you know me, so my name is Ursula, pronouns she and her. And I've been with you most of the way throughout these webinars this spring and beginning of year. And before we get going, just a shout out quickly to our team from Glamazon side. So hey, thank you so much for sponsoring us. So our Global Affinity Group leaders are sponsoring also our training programs, certification programs to get you to where you want to go in your career. I will cover quickly about the certifications, things that is good to remember. We have covered these in the past also. So things like, if you look at this spring, why are we here? So we are covering the practitioner content, but also you can use it for other purposes just to get to know the AWS environment. We are a lot of people. So in the best scenarios, we have had hundreds of people. And where are we going? Basically, this session will cover the exam prep. So during the spring, we have gone through the webinar training, which is the technology training. We have done immersion days, which are the hands-on part, and now we get to the certification part. And we are aiming to get to the practitioner. Most of you know that there's a lot of certifications that are available. This is the foundational level, and this is also evolving. So those of you who follow us on AWS's side, you have noticed that we are actually introducing a couple of beta exams. We have also asked you the question of, what would you like to do next? And there's quite a lot of answers that say we would like to do data engineer next. So most likely what we will introduce next autumn is the data engineer certification path. So you will get that invitation in your inbox. But yeah, so today we are looking at the practitioner side. And keep in mind, depending on where you're starting from or where you're starting off, the way to get to the practitioner might be a bit different. So sometimes it requires a bit more studying, also self-study. Sometimes you might be completely ready now. The content that you have in the recorded side covers all and everything, like the majority of things you need to know. Today, what we are going to do, I'm going to introduce you to the way that the exam questions are laid out. So what kinds of questions and what content areas should you be expecting? And hopefully that will make your life a bit easier when you look at the actual exam day. So let's get going. So I will do a bit of introduction on the practitioner exam itself. So let's look at a few things. One is how to prepare. And let's say if you're not yet confident that you have everything that you need, there are certain things that you can use, certain webinars that you can use. Of course, everything that we have recorded, you can reuse from Mimmit Koodaa site. And then we'll go through the actual official question sets of what do those questions in those different categories look like. And I think one of the most important parts is that you understand what kinds of questions and what are the keywords you should look out for. We can do a bit of Q&A in the end. And like I said, you will get access to your registration for the exam voucher. So a few things, exam style, exam topics, so basically what we call domains. And also, are there things that you can still do to prepare for your exam? And of course, how do you assess, are you ready? So I will cover those in the beginning. So I popped in a few things, links and such in the slide deck. So you will get the slide deck. There are things like where can you find the exam details, where is the site for that. There's a couple of links for accessing the practitioner main page, and also what's included. So what should you expect to see once you go to the exam? So the exam details, what is the exam style and what is the exam guide? So if you go to the main page of Certified Cloud Practitioner for Amazon Web Services, there's an exam guide that you should download. And I'm not dropping it in the Slack for you just for the reason that it's updated also quite often. So please use the links on the main page. The exam guide itself covers things like the introduction of what is the actual exam area, what is the typical target candidate description, and also, of course, exam content. And that's the exam guide. So it's not that long, but it's a good idea to kind of introduce yourself to the exam guide. We will go through like the foundational areas today. And there's one more thing that you might like to download for yourself before you go to the exam is the official practice question set. And it's not very long, but you will have questions where you can do a bit of sparring also before the exam. So one thing that we get very often when people take their first certification exam for AWS is that, what are the topics that I should know? Like, what exam areas should I know in order to be certain that I'm ready? So there are a lot of content, as you can see. So it's not only the Mimmit Koodaa Women Who Code content. On the main page of Practitioner, there's a lot of content, links, prep guides, practice exams, etc. But there are a few more that I will mention for you just to cover those that you know that these are available. So there is exam topics that you can spar, can be found in our digital training library. And then you have different skill builder options. Some of them are subscription based, some of them are not. But there's a lot of content when it comes to the foundational level. So that's probably the most or best covered area. So what we have done throughout the spring, so all the things that we have gone through, like the cloud fundamentals, the network and security, all and everything that we have covered here is basically the prep for your exam. So if I mentioned that take an exam prep course, one thing to maybe think about if you have skipped something, let's say you skipped the security lectures, I would advise you to kind of run through those. So run through the recordings to just see what's in there. So if you have skipped one like big component, it's a good idea to go back to the recording and watch it. We do have similar recordings on our Practitioner and Skill Builder site. But you have all the content that you need in the Mimmit Koodaa site. How do you know if you're ready? And one part is taking part today in the Practitioner Exam Prep. The other part is that assessing your exam readiness. There's the official practice exam. So you can always take the official practice exam that uses the similar kind of question and answer style. But I'm going to do a bit broader today. So I'm going to do a bit broader type of question and answer session. So this is also a good idea to kind of spar your readiness to see how often you will hit that correct answer. And what I would suggest for you to do, what you can use in the Zoom environment is that once you start seeing questions, you can either use the chat or you can use the different emojis. So let's say that if you know that the answer is, let's say if it's a multi-answer, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4. If you know that it's 1 and 4, you can actually drop that in the chat if you like to. You basically can use that to kind of see like where you are at, so how often you will get the right answer. The other part is, why is that the right answer? So that's what we are aiming to do here today. So to see why is it the right answer to answer this way. So let's look at the exam itself. So in order to be successful in the exam, you need to know how the exam is laid out. So the exam number that is now officially available and is being used is CLF C02. So it's the newer version of Practitioner Exam. Why is there a newer version of the Practitioner Exam? If you have done this in the past, you might know that there's quite a lot of services that has been added to Amazon Web Services. So this exam, this new exam, covers also the newer options. Let's say AI, ML, style questions might be in there, but they are still on the fundamental level. So it won't be very complex when it comes to those questions, but it might include more than what you have done in the past if you have done Practitioner in the past. One key thing to keep in mind, where should you focus on, is that what is the exam overview? So let's look at that. So exam overview, we have 4 domains that you will have questions on. So domain 1 is cloud concepts. Domain 2 is security and compliance. Domain 3 is cloud technology and services. And domain 4 is billing, pricing, and support. And as you can see here, not all areas are equal. So the domain 4 is the smallest area. And typically, like last session that we ran, we talked about what kinds of questions you might have. For example, what are the savings plans that you can use when you're committing to 1, 2, or 3 year terms? So those kinds of questions you might see in the billing, pricing, and support, but it will be the smallest area in the exam. And then you have 3 quite equally, not completely equally split areas, but bigger areas than the last one. So I think what we will do today, which will be kind of serving the purpose of seeing if you are ready to take the exam, is to go through all these domains. So let's go through all these domains and cover different questions and also test yourself, like how do you feel, that are those obvious answers for you, or is there something that you would have to still go in and check or rerun a recording? So let's start with the first domain, that is the cloud concepts. So domain 1, cloud concepts, you could include certain things in there, which will be the first session that we ran, which is the cloud fundamentals. We spoke about what is the benefit of the cloud and how did the whole cloud journey start with AWS. So you can basically take those first learning sessions and run those. So that covers the majority of the topics that you will see in this part. One thing to keep in mind, this domain might include certain fundamental topics from different domains, so 2, 3, and 4, but typically it is the fundamental piece. So the outline for this domain is that you need to be able to define the benefits of the cloud. And what are the kind of the different strategies if you look at the cloud and how to implement it? So what are the migration strategies? How does cloud economics work? What does cloud economics work? Because you have the billing and pricing at the domain 4. Cloud economics is more about what is the scale of cloud and how does scale of economies work? So meaning that we purchase quite a lot of tech in a kind of a bulk pricing way, and we sell that to the customer. So understanding the benefits of that principles. And of course, just the design principles of how to use services, what are microservices, what is the benefit of microservices. Let's start by asking a few exam questions. So we'll go through different domains and we'll cover certain different exam questions. So let's start with domain 1 and let's start with first question. And let's start with this. So you will see a question in the exam asking you, you need to define the benefits of using AWS Cloud. So let's say it could be formulated in ways like this. So there could be a question of what are the benefits of using AWS Cloud for companies with customers in many countries around the world. And if it's a multi-answer, multi-choice, it will say how many correct answers there are. So you don't have to guess, is it 2, 3, or what is it? So there will always be with multi-answer, select 2, so you can't actually select more than that. So you know that there will be a suggestion of what is the correct answer. couple of things that people ask when they do the first certification exam is that, what about if I have one right and one wrong? It's still a wrong answer. So it will not be like supplementing your score if you have one right, one wrong. So let's look at this question and let's highlight certain things. So let's highlight it. So what you're in principle being asked is the benefits. You have companies and customers, or companies or customers in different parts of the world, different countries around the world. And then you have two possible answer choices. And now I'm going to switch to the slide that shows you the options, that shows you A, B, C, and so forth. What you can do once you have read through the options, and remember you have two correct choices, you can actually drop them in the chat if you like to say like, hey, I think these and these are correct, just to test yourself to see how it works. And then I will explain why the answer is answered the way, or why the question is answered the way it is. So what are the right choices, and for what reason are certain things the wrong choices? So let's start with the first one. We want to see the benefits of AWS Cloud with customers around the world. Two correct choices. So one thing to keep in mind when you read the answer options is that look at the certain terms that you hear or see there. So you see companies can deploy applications in multiple AWS regions to reduce latency. Then it talks about certain services like Amazon Translate, CloudFront, Comprehend, Elastic Load Balancing. One thing that strikes out for me is that some are very specific. So they might be very specific in ways of, yeah, that's probably a benefit, but is it the benefit for the whole AWS cloud? And keeping in mind, you need two. So might be that looking at this answer style is that you see the companies, keyword, multiple regions, reduce latency. And then again, looking through the different answers that talk about certain services, yeah, there might be very specific answers, but they are talking about, like, let's say, localization to a local language. So maybe not so interesting. So let's look at how we would answer this. So in this answer, there's two options that jump out. The first one, the A, companies can deploy applications in multiple AWS regions to reduce latency. So that's definitely something that is beneficial for global users, local users, so the reach of the infra. Then there's the C, which says Amazon CloudFront has multiple edge locations. So keeping in mind that the edge location takes content closer to multiple customers. So we have a whole lot of edge locations. And it does that around the world in order to reduce latency. So those are very specific to the whole benefit of the global infra. Even though you might see things that are absolutely correct. So if you look at the Amazon Translate, automatically translates third party, etc. Yes, but it's very specifically on that specific service. So it's not a global as such if you look at the main streamlined benefits. So let's look at the answer. So use of regions worldwide. Yes, they improve applications' global performance and reduce latency. That we know. CloudFront is the content delivery network, so the CDN, that also securely delivers data, videos, applications, APIs to global customers with low latency and high transfer speeds. So we know that these two are correct. What about the incorrect ones? Like, why are they incorrect? Let's run through those. So there was Amazon Translate automatically translates third-party website interfaces into multiple languages. So first of all, there might be wrong data in there. So keep in mind, what does it do? So for example, here we see that it doesn't provide automatic translation to third-party website interfaces. Even if it would use certain specific terms that are true for Amazon Translate, that's probably not the only benefit if you look at the global infra. So it goes into very minute details. So that might not be the correct way to answer. What about the other ones? So there was Amazon Comprehend allows users to build applications that can respond to user requests in many languages. Yes, it's a natural language processing service. It uses machine learning to find insights, relationships in text. Few things, there's incorrect data, but sometimes it could be correct, but it's still too small if you look at the context of the global infra. What is the benefit of the AWS cloud? So it would be incorrect. And then we had last incorrect option, which would be what are the benefits of using AWS cloud? So there was the elastic load balancing. So it can distribute applications, web traffic to multiple regions around the world, which reduces latency. So here's a couple of things. The load balancer as such doesn't do targets across regions. So for somebody who knows the infra well, would say like, no, this is incorrect. Like I don't even have to look at that like answer. And then again, thinking about, is that the only tool that you would use? Is that the only options that is broad enough in this kind of fundamental question set? So here we have incorrect data, so it doesn't do regions. And yeah, load balancing is definitely one of the key services, but it's not the only fundamental piece in this one. So this is one of typical question examples for domain one. Let's do another one. So let's talk about designing something, building a solution. So how do we identify design principles on AWS cloud? So let's take this is 1.2, so this is still domain one, identifying design principles of the AWS cloud. So the question is, a user deploys an Amazon RDS, so relational database service, database instance, in multiple availability zones. Then you have a question that once you see this kind of question, you might ask yourself, what do you remember from the fundamental pieces that we have been talking about the design pillars of well-architected framework? If you feel that this is not hitting home, that you don't remember, there's really good site for the well-architected framework. It's about the design principles and how should you build, if you look at resiliency, if you look at security and such. So it's asking about pillars, and let's look at the keywords. So a user is deploying something. We know that it's a RDS-DB instance, so it's a relational database. It has multiple availability zones. And then you look at what are the response options. So sometimes you might also see here or notice that there are incorrect options that don't even exist. Let's look at what we have. So it's offering us performance efficiency. It's offering us reliability, cost optimization, and security. And in some cases, something that is very broad in the answer set, you might say like, hey, I think most of these, but it will hit one category definitely. And you notice that the question style is that it doesn't have the bracket behind it. So it doesn't have that 2, 3, whatever answer options. So this will only have one. So if you look at what that one option could be, so it's hitting reliability. And the explanation why it's hitting reliability is that the reliability pillar in the well-architected framework is the ability of a workload to perform its intended function correctly and consistently when it's expected to do so. So in any ways that you're designing it, it should be reliable. And when you have RDS, and when you share that across multiple availability zones, so remember you had that virtual private cloud, so VPC, that network infra spans multiple availability zones across that region. When you have those services in those different availability zones, 1, 2, 3, and so forth, that builds reliability. So goal is to actually reduce the single points of failure, and that will increase reliability. So as soon as you see more services added to the stack, then you can think about reliability. Let's look at the other explanations why they are incorrect. So there was performance efficiency, because one might think that, hey, performance efficiency might hit home here. So performance efficiency, so the ability to use computing resources efficiently to meet system requirements and maintain that efficiency as demand changes. So you have more users, less users, etc. And your technologies evolve. So use of multiple availability zones does not increase performance efficiency as such. One might think like, hey, interesting. That might be that if I'm thinking about I have multiple availability zones, I could actually share the load across those multiple availability zones. Think about which domain you're answering to. So for example, here, we are looking at the fundamental pieces. So you don't have to overcomplicate it. When you get to associate or even professional level exams, then there might be a lot of nuances. Nuances as such that could that service, like RDS, allow the load balancing across all those availability zones? But in this context, you are not looking at that. You're looking at the fundamental piece. So it won't be performance efficiency for multitude of reasons, one of them being the fact that you're not automatically with RDS doing load balancing across those zones. You're actually having those as a backup that you can actually fail over to another zone. Or let's say you might have like a reader endpoints that you might actually use them for reading, not just reading or writing. What about the cost optimization? So there was the option of cost optimization. So the cost optimization pillar is the system's ability to run and deliver the business value at the lowest price point available. So actually, if you look at the reliability and also like the supportive resources and the multiple availability zones, it actually will increase cost. So you know that the cost will go up definitely. So most likely you're not cost optimizing if you're adding more availability zones, regions and such. But that being said, if you would go to associate the professional, there might be nuances in this exam, not very likely. And then there was last one piece, which is the security side. So security pillar as such is the system's ability to protect the data and the assets that you have in there, including the data sets that you have, and improve the company security. And when you look at the availability zone, the concept itself might include certain things that are security related, but it will not increase the system security just to go to multiple availability zones. So that is the reasoning on those kind of fundamental question pieces. Let's take another one on the fundamental pieces. So let's look at another style of question, which would be, how do you understand the benefits of the cloud? And this is a very, very typical question style that you will see. So understand the benefits and strategies for migrations to AWS cloud. Sometimes you see very long questions. So sometimes you might see something like this. So you have a company that has an on-premises environment. So they have on-premises server room. And they have an Oracle database that runs on that on-prem environment. The company wants to migrate their database server to run on Amazon EC2 instances in AWS. And then there's a question, which service should the company use to complete the migration? And let's look at the keywords. So there's a Linux, it's on-premises, it's an Oracle database, then you have EC2 instance. And then the question is, if you have a database, which service would you use to complete the migration? Let's look at those. And also notice that in this context, you don't have that one or two option there. So it will be just one. So you will see the option A, database migration service. Then there's a migration hub, application migration service, and application discovery service. Keep in mind, sometimes in these categories, you might have a completely wrong answer. Like there might be something that is just pulled out of the hat. So somebody might add a service that's non-existent. So it's basically just a figment of imagination. So, but in this context, you probably would guess what it is. Or let's see how it turns out. So on-premise Linux, Oracle database, database server running on EC2 instance, and which service should the company use to complete the migration. So we have an answer that points to C. And then we might ask ourselves, like, why is this the correct answer? So let's look at the answer key. So the answer key, why it's pointing to C, and I know that some of you might think that, hey, database migration service might be the correct option for this, and it still might be in some context, is that the application migration service automates the lift and shift solution. So it can actually take full physical servers and any database or application that runs on them. So the keyword here would have been the EC2 instances. Would the database migration service been like completely wrong? Not necessarily. So you might still actually in the real world scenario use it, but here you're kind of targeted towards an answer choice that might not be correct. So let's look why the database migration service is not correct. So DMS, database migration service, can be used to migrate databases from on-premises database to a database in AWS. What it doesn't do is the fact that it's talking about the EC2 instance, so context of that instance. So it doesn't take that context of the whole instance and those settings and migrate those to AWS. It takes the data of the database instance. So it gets to a kind of a nitty-gritty detail side, but there you have to be very careful of what's being asked. So in many contexts, like I said, you might still use database migration service, but is it the best option if you want to actually take the EC2 instance and replicate those physical attributes from the actual on-prem environment? Maybe not. So you might see something where you think this is not maybe the answer choice that I would answer, but keeping in mind the specific wording or the keywords of the answer, you might still have to choose it. What are the other options that we are offered? The other options are AWS Migration Hub. So AWS Migration Hub is actually a service that helps you plan and track your application migrations. So it doesn't do like system level, like the Linux host level migrations. And yeah, so basically it's also not specifically targeted towards the database migrations. And then there was one more piece that was the application discovery service. Why is that incorrect? So there's application discovery service that collects information about the usage and configuration of on-premises servers to help plan a migration to AWS. You might actually see a question that is related to this when you go to the exam, and somebody might ask like, hey, your customer has an on-prem, quite diverse on-prem environment. You would need to collect the usage data and configurations from multiple different sources. What tool would you use? That might be actually then the answer, application discovery service, but it doesn't actually do the migration. So it doesn't actually do the performing the migration. It's just that discovery service of what are the pieces that we should migrate. So if we still stay in the domain 1, so the cloud fundamentals, let's talk about the cloud economics. And keeping in mind, cloud economics is a piece that is still in the fundamental section. You have the cost optimization and cost control at the last domain, so domain 4. This will be simpler. So most likely the cloud economics are much broader as concepts when you see questions on these. So let's see what we get. So understanding concepts of cloud economics. And this will be an interesting one. So how does AWS charge for AWS Lambda, so keeping in mind it's a serverless solution, once the free tier has been exceeded? So let's say that you have had your free tier account, but you have run out of that either time or capacity-wise. So you can't use free tier anymore. And you will have two options here. So you have to choose two in order to get the right answer. Let's look at the keywords. So we are looking at a chart. So basically, how does AWS formulate the charge on Lambda, which is the serverless usage? once the free tier has been exceeded. And we need 2 options. And here, don't get alarmed when you see a lot of options. So kind of take your time looking at them. So you will have from A to E. So from A to E, you see by the time it takes the Lambda function to run. B says by the number of versions of a specific Lambda function, by the number of requests made for a given Lambda function, by the programming language that is used for the Lambda function, by the total number of Lambda function in an AWS account. So kind of when you look at that full list, you also start seeing certain keywords. And most likely when you see suggestions like programming language, probably not, also maybe not versions, doesn't always seem to be, that would be kind of a vague way of doing the billing. So let's look at the correct answers, and then let's look at the incorrect, why they are incorrect. So I would say A and C, and that is the correct options, but why are they correct? So A says by the time it takes for the Lambda function to run. So Lambda charges on AWS environment, so serverless, so those abstracted ways of executing code are dependent on the amount of time it takes to run the code. So we spoke about the serverless side, and you remember that there are certain things, certain limits, time limits that are typical for Lambda. So those like maximum of 15 minutes and such, so quite short running code. It is attached to cost also. So once you're paying for the cost, it is based on also the time it takes to execute. Lambda also charges dependent on the number of requests. So how many Lambda functions, how many requests do you have, and how long does it take to execute? So this is also a quite fundamental piece of the way that the cost is built inside AWS Infra. Why are the others wrong? So why are the other options incorrect? So let's look at the number of versions of specific Lambda function. So you can have multiple versions of Lambda functions, but that doesn't actually contribute to that cost, because that's quite a vague way of looking at cost. So it's essentially the number of requests and the duration. What about the other ones? So you have the option of programming language. So you have multiple programming languages that you can use. That is also not something that contributes to the cost piece of serverless. So if you want to be really nitty-gritty about it, you might actually, when you use different kind of language and how do you write it and how do you actually execute it, sometimes it might contribute to the fact how long it takes. But it's not actually based on how the course is built. So we don't care about which language you use. So still it takes number of requests and time to run. And what about the last one? So the total number of Lambda functions inside an AWS account. No, we don't care about that. So it's not a fundamental piece of how the cost is built. So those are the domain 1 typical examples of what you would see in the exam questions. So keep in mind, it will not be overcomplicated. It will not go into very exceptional cases of, hey, if this, then that. So you don't have to kind of start finding that there's like something hidden inside the answer. So of course, if you don't know a specific service, then you might actually overcomplicate it yourself. So if you don't know the service name, you might have to kind of take a guess. But also keep in mind, you should always answer all the questions. So you should never leave an exam that doesn't have an answer. You will not get minus points for answering something incorrectly. So you can answer it incorrectly, but please don't leave it empty, because you could even choose the correct answer even if you don't absolutely know what it is. Couple of practical things when you're answering questions, if you get stuck in something. So let's say that when you're looking at the question like this 1.4 and you're seeing this question, how does AWS charge for AWS Lambda usage once the free tier has been exceeded? And you think like, I have no idea. There's a couple of scenarios that you could use. One thing is that if you don't want to spend time on this question at the moment, if you have some kind of vague idea what this could be, you might mark those two and say it could be A, it could be C. And then you can do a check mark on top of the exam. So there's a check mark on top of the exam where you can say, mark this, and you will return to that before you exit the exam. So all of them that have check marks, you will return to before you can actually exit the exam. So that is a strategy that I use specifically on the exams when the question is so complex that I could just spend 10 minutes looking at the question and thinking, I have no idea. So you can get faster through those that you absolutely know and can answer quickly. And then you can focus on those that you are not so certain about. So that's my suggestion of doing kind of a tactical planning of your exam. So this was the part of domain 1. So these are very typical questions of domain 1. Let's look at domain 2. So domain 2 is the security and compliance piece. And the outline of this domain, there are certain things. So understanding how the shared responsibility model works. So keep that in mind. So the shared responsibility model of what is AWS responsible of and what is the customer responsible of. And how cloud security and governance and compliance concepts works. And also, what is the access management capability? So very typically identity and access management. And what are the different components and resources for security? And I think I have a couple of really fundamental pieces that you will see often in your exam. So let's go through those example questions. So let's talk about the shared responsibility model. I would say that you can't go into practitioner exam without seeing at least one question on this. So you can be pretty certain you will have one question in some shape or form in the practitioner exam. Okay, so the question is, which tasks are the customer's responsibility according to the AWS shared responsibility model? Choose two. So the keywords, customer's responsibility. And now one really critical piece that you need to remember when you go into exam, there could be not in the beginning of this sentence. So it could say which tasks are not the customer's responsibility. So missing that one critical piece in the questioning might completely spoil your answer. So when you're clicking too fast and going like, yes, I know what is the customer's responsibility. Is it the customer's responsibility or is it not the customer's responsibility? So there are certain hooks in the exam that you might see. And then you need to choose two. So let's look at the response options. Again, don't let it confuse you that you have multiple options. So let's look at those. Patch the operating system that AWS Lambda function uses. So customers' responsibilities we are searching for. Install patches on Amazon RDS DB instances. Control physical access to the data centers that contains the customer's VPCs, most likely not. So that would be kind of an obvious, not that one, absolutely. Configure IAM users according to the principle of least privilege. Okay. Configure an Amazon S3 bucket to allow public access. So we are searching for the customer's responsibilities. So first glimpse for me would be that D and E would be correct. But why are they correct? So the answer key to this kind of question, and you can expect seeing something like this in the exam, is that couple of things. When you're doing least privilege for your organization, it varies based on which organization you're working for. So let's say that you're working for an organization that is like a global enterprise that has different teams, and let's say that you're building like a internal intranet website. The least privilege for that, and let's say a hospital system, is completely different. So it couldn't be the AWS security team's responsibility to say what is the correct least privilege. So most likely here, this is the one fundamental piece that has to be the customer's responsibility. So customer defines the users and access policies that apply to those users. And the least privilege varies based on the workload and the purpose of what you're building. What about the S3 bucket? So this customer determines access permissions to S3 buckets that customer owns. What does S3 buckets hold? They hold data, they hold documents, they might hold rows of data, columns, values. So only the customer can know if it is okay to make it publicly accessible. Of course, our security policy on AWS side warns you about, hey, you're making it public, you're making it publicly accessible. But the decision is made by the customer. So the customer decides if it can be publicly available. Can the customer also make bad decisions? Yes, absolutely, you can. But it is the customer's choice. So why are those other options incorrect? So there was a suggestion of patch the operating system that Lambda function uses. Why is it incorrect? Well, Lambda as a service is a serverless solution that abstracts the serverless side. So the customer does not have the access to the abstraction layer. So customer will not be doing the patching of the operating system. So it's not a fundamental functionality that is there for Lambda. It's done by AWS. What about the install patches on RDS DB instances? So relational database service is a managed database service. And on that side, we manage the patches for RDS engine. What customer can actually choose is the timeline when those patches are installed. So keep in mind, certain things, certain activities might be owned by AWS, but customer controls when they are executed. What about the last one? Control physical access to the data center. So we do not allow access to the data centers. Customers can only take like virtual tours if you want to do so, to understand like how security measures and controls are in place, but you cannot visit them on site. So then you can't be responsible for the physical security. That's a very fundamental question on shared security model or shared security responsibility model. What about the governance and security and compliance concepts? So we have the second question in this domain. And let's look at what the question looks like. So company needs to monitor and receive alerts about AWS's management console sign-in events that involve the AWS account root user. Which AWS service can the company use to meet these requirements? Okay, let's look at the keywords. We are talking about management console. We want to have monitoring and alerting in place, and we want to look at root user access. And because the question is formulated the way that it is, it doesn't have multi-choice, it's only one. So then we are looking at what are the options. So we have the identity and access management below, we have the trusted advisor, we have the config, and we have CloudWatch. At first kind of view, I would say A is most likely the correct one for the reason that is like most typically linked to things like monitoring and alerting. Let's look at the answer key. So answer key says, yes, CloudWatch is correct, but why is it correct? So if we look at CloudWatch, so it monitors your AWS resources and the applications that you run on AWS. And it is a real-time monitoring solution. You can use CloudWatch together with CloudTrail to monitor and receive alerts about console sign-in events, and also the root user in this context, now that the question is handling the root user. But it doesn't really matter. So you would be using this in any case for monitoring and alerting, regardless if it's a normal user or a root user. So the service is the same. When you see options like CloudWatch and CloudTrail in the same screen, one thing to keep in mind is that CloudTrail is fundamentally about auditing what the user is doing. Like if you look at things like API requests, so what the user, root user, or normal user is doing. And then again, CloudWatch is a kind of a bit higher up, so looking at different system level events and alerting on those. And you can add functionality and depth to those options by actually introducing like deeper level of monitoring and options on a service-based level. But those are the fundamental building blocks that you would use. There are certain things that might kind of sound familiar still in the same screen that we had the CloudWatch option available. And one of them might be AWS config. So why is AWS config wrong? So you can actually use AWS config to look at the resources or like services that you have and also audit them to see how the configuration of your resources is done. So also how the configuration changes over time. What it cannot do is actually alert you about console sign-in events, or let's say that you're looking at like performance data and such. This is not really the service that does that. This is more about configuration changes over time, and you want to see like what is the configuration change drift, or let's say if you're implementing something that might be like incorrect parameters, you would find those in config. So you have a locking mechanism, but it's fundamental piece for configuration side. So it's very close, but it's not correct. Then you will have trusted advisor. And trusted advisor is most likely on this screen because you can use it for real-time guidance. So you can, for example, provision your resources differently, follow different best practices, but it's not about alerting you about who's signing in and when they are signing in. So that is fundamentally on the CloudWatch side. But will it help you to streamline how you configure your different users? Yes, it can do that. So then you will have suggestions, you should be doing this, and these are the best practices for users. And there's one more piece, which is the IAM. So there was the option of identity and access management. So one might think that the place where you configure users and where you configure those privileges would be the correct place to use for alerting of those login events. It is not. So this is how do you manage access to AWS services and resources securely, but it cannot do the alerting of your console sign-in events, regardless if it's a normal user or root user. All right. Let's do maybe one or two more on the security domain. And let's look at the access management. So let's focus on the access management capabilities. So let's start with a kind of a short question of which credential components are required to gain programmatic access to an AWS account. And the keywords here is to have programmatic. So programmatic meaning that you will have a way of accessing the infra other than the console, so other than logging on the console. Things to keep in mind. First of all, everything that you do on the AWS side is an API. So you can always call that API, regardless if you are in the console, if you are command line, etc. But how do you gain programmatic access so that you don't have to do your traditional typing in your username and your password and maybe doing a multi-factor? What are the components there? And there's two components there. So let's look at the options. So it offers us an access key ID. It offers us a primary key. Then it's a secret access key. You have a user ID and a secondary key. So we need two options. And I would, from the top of my head, I would use A and C for the reason that the way that they are typed out are typically related to how AWS accounts are configured. Primary key directly points to relational databases, so most likely it's not that one. User ID, I would say, is more likely the console user ID that you would use to log on and so forth. So let's look at the answer options. So we have an access key ID and a secret access key. Why? So in order to build a programmatic access, requires an access key and a secret access key that can be assigned to a AWS user. And those are the fundamental pieces in order to actually do that programmatic access from different kinds of formats of accessing your environment. let's look at why the other options are wrong. So there you might have like some things that might look correct, but are not. So things that might look correct is, like I said, primary key. That is a database management primary key. So how do you configure relational database and relations and models and connections and relationships between data? So it has nothing to do with the programmatic access. What about the user ID? So user ID is used for security credentials, but not for programmatic access. So regardless, you will always have a user ID, but if you would like to have the programmatic access, you would need those secret and access keys. And there was one more that was incorrect, and that was secondary key. And that is the secondary key is also from relational databases. So secondary key is database management feature. It doesn't grant anything to the AWS account. So sometimes you might see options that have nothing to do with actually the topic area that you ask questions about. It might have something to do with security as such, but not as the IAM or IAM programmatic access. So these are the question options that I will say on security, and then I will actually jump and talk about the domain tree. And why we jump on that one is because it's the broadest category. So domain tree is a cloud technology and services. And there you have to be very careful because you have similarly named things, and you might be led by using certain service names that are not actually existing, but are very similar. So let's look at the domain tree. So domain tree, cloud technology and services, it has a whole host of different things that it can cover. So these are the different categories that you might see. How do you deploy and operate the AWS cloud? What is the global infra? So what does it mean when we talk about global infra, like regions, availability zones, edge locations? How does VPC work, for example, in that context? What is a compute service? And keeping in mind, compute service might be like an EC2 instance, or it could be also serverless like Lambda. Network services, VPCs, and how do you have subnets below that? So subnets meaning that you have that fundamental piece inside a VPC that is availability zone 1, 2, and 3. How does load balancing work? And what are the different storage services? And it can be as fundamental as asking, what is the most used object storage service in AWS side? So then you just have to remember what is an object storage service and what is not an object storage service. And now, because this is the newer version of Practitioner, it will have questions on artificial intelligence and machine learning, very simple ones, but it might have a few questions on that. And how do you identify services from other in-scope AWS service categories? So let's take examples on this, and then we only have one more category, so then we're actually done with the prep, but let's look at this one. So let's start with the how do you define methods of deploying and operating in the AWS cloud. So let's take a company example. So a company wants to establish a consistent and private connection from company's on-premise data center to AWS cloud. So, okay, we have a connectivity between on-prem and cloud. Which AWS service will meet these requirements? So the keywords, consistent and private connection. So private being very operational in this question. Company's on-premise data center to AWS cloud. Think about the networking session that you have done. In the networking session, we talked about the options that are crossing the public internet and which are private. And then let's look at the answer options. So you have A, B, C, D. You only have one option here that can be used. And here you start looking at, you have a client VPN. You have an Amazon Connect. You have Direct Connect. And then you have site-to-site VPN. So here you need to understand what these different components do. And the answer most likely in this context is Direct Connect. And let's look at it. Why is that? because there are a couple of fundamental pieces you need to know. So direct connect is the correct link between an internal network using a direct connect location through a basically fiber optic cable. So if you look at the configuration as such, so you have the one side of the network, which basically is your router, and the other side that connects to a direct connect router. What's fundamental here is that it's private, it's customer specific. So that is dedicated to that company. So here you would look at the keywords of private, consistent, and the consistency comes that you have a dedicated amount of transfer speed that is guaranteed and it's directly purchased for your company. Why are the other options wrong? So there's one option that is completely wrong, but the name might suggest something else. And then there are options that might be doable, but not for this purpose. So you have AWS Client VPN as the option A. So AWS Client VPN, that is a managed service. It's a VPN service that gives you access to securely access your resources from on-premises network. So one might think like, hey, this sounds correct. So you can connect from any location, so it's not dedicated for your on-prem. So it's using an OpenVPN-based VPN client. You would use this for individual laptops. So individual workers that are working from home or other sites than your office location, not an entire data center. So it doesn't scale for that. What about the Amazon Connect? Even though the word might sound correct, it's nothing to do with this kind of direct connectivity or private connectivity. So Amazon Connect is a cloud contact center. You can provide customer service like phone center service on a public internet, also having like dial-in services paid by either the calling user or by your company. So it has got zero to do to actually connect your on-prem to cloud environment. It's about providing a full-on managed service that is a contact service that uses different ways of, you can use chatbots, you can use phone lines, etc. It's not a dedicated channel. And then there was one more that is a VPN option that also might sound correct. So you have site-to-site VPN. And site-to-site VPN creates an encrypted network path between your on-prem network and your cloud. So, but it uses internet, so it uses the public interface. So you can't expect consistency, or the consistency is pretty much expected of not being there in ways that an enterprise would want to see it. The traffic is encrypted, but the connection as such is not private because the internet is a shared resource. So in that context, the only option that we have left is actually that direct connect option, because that gives you a dedicated channel. Remember also that that dedicated channel will have and introduce a price point. So it will have a price point and a fee that will scale up based on how much capacity you need for that service. All right. That was about the networking components. How about database services? So how do we identify AWS database services? So let's take a very typical question. So there's a company that requires a relational database on AWS that records new customer orders from a website. Which AWS service or feature will meet these requirements? And now, keeping in mind, you need to look at the keywords. And the most important keyword here is the relational database. So when you see options, you might see databases that are non-relational. So let's look at this. So you have 4 options, and you only have 1 option available here. So you are provided with options of Global Accelerator, DynamoDB, Amazon Aurora, and Amazon Elastic Block Store, EBS. And here, this would be kind of a simple question, because on this list, I don't see a single one that is, so other than one that is relational database. So I would say like Amazon Aurora is most likely the only option from this list. But why is it so? So Amazon Aurora. So what we can say about that? So Aurora is a MySQL and PostgreSQL compatible relational database built for the cloud. And it combines different performance and availability options of traditional enterprise databases with the simplicity and cost effectiveness of open source databases. So that is cool. So we know that that's a relational database. Why are the other options wrong? And then let's cover something that you might also see in this screen. So incorrect explanations. So you have a global accelerator. So global accelerator is a networking service that actually improves your users' network traffic by about 60%. So it uses the global network infra, and global accelerator as such is not a relational database. So it's a networking service. Then we have another database service that is actually a database on this list, which is Amazon DynamoDB. The reason this is incorrect is that because of the keyword relational. So DynamoDB is a NoSQL non-relational database service. It is fast, it is predictable for the speed, so it can get to from microsecond to millisecond latencies and seamless scalability. So one might think like, hey, cool, this is a database, but it's not relational. So that is the key why DynamoDB is not the correct option. And then last but not least is the EBS. So Amazon EBS is a block storage service. So you can use EBS with, let's say you have your EC2 instances for different workloads and it can scale. You can even use that with your own EC2 instances that host relational databases. But as such, EBS is not a relational database. It's just a storage that can be used together with relational database. If you look at this kind of question, so if we go back to the answer option, so let's take the answer key. So you see this kind of question, and let's say that you have that keyword in there that says like company requires a relational database. Let's say you're guided towards more of a, what is the best relational database for the purpose? And you see options like Amazon or Aurora, you see RDS, you see EC2 instances that have your own hosted database components and binaries. There you have to really be careful about what's being asked if you see that there are multiple relational databases on that list. So this is an easy one if you know all these services because there's only one relational database in the answer options. All right, so let's look at the storage services. And this is also an area that it's a good idea to rehearse this a bit because things that you might be asked if you haven't seen this question style before is that because you have so many storage services, so you have your object storage, you have your block storage, you have your shared storage options. So let's look at a few questions that might pop up. So a very short question. Which of the functionalities are characteristics for Amazon S3? So keeping in mind S3 is an object storage, and you have two options, so you will have multi-choice. So keywords are characteristics, S3, and you have two options. So then we look at the options. It provides us with options of a global file system, an object store, a local file store, a network file system, a durable storage system. Things I would search for here is, of course, the fundamental purpose of that service. So is it an object storage? Is it the block storage? Is it the shared storage? So what is the keyword? So most likely the B sounds about it could be right. When it comes to S3, think about what are the key benefits. So remember we talked about the number of nines of durability it offers. And that being said, it's most likely durability that is the second option. So let's look at the answer key. So it says an object store, a durable storage system. So S3 is an object storage service that we already know. And then we have a durability, durable object storage service. Why are the other options wrong? So let's look at those other options. So it says a global file system. S3 is not a global file system. So think about the durability that we talked about. So that fact that we do replicate the data across availability zones, we are still talking about a regional service. So as such, building that Amazon S3 into a global file system, you would have to do design phases yourself in order to make it into a global file system. And those options would be like using region-to-region replication between the S3 buckets. But as such, on its own, it's not a global file system. What about the local file store? It's also not a local file store because it's a regional one. So it uses multiple availability zones and builds that durability based on those minimum of 3 availability zones. A network file system. S3 is not in this concept a network file system. It is an object storage. What would be a network file system? Any kind of shared file system that would be like an NFS style or a Samba style file system would be a network file system in this context. Is it networked? Is it connected via internet? Yes, it is. But the fundamental piece is that it is an object storage. So this is kind of a key question style that you will see for services. What about the new questions about AI and ML? So how do you identify artificial intelligence and machine learning, AI, ML services, and analytics? So a company wants to create a learning application for students. And the learning application must give your students the option to choose a button to have the text read out loud to them. And what would be the machine learning service that will meet this requirement? You will not see very like a multiple of these, but you will see a few. So I would say what I did, I actually repeated my practitioner just, I don't know, 3 months ago or something. So I've done this newer version. Maybe I saw 1 or 2 in this area. So you will probably see a few. So let's look at the keywords. So it's an application. You want to have the text read out loud, and you want to use machine learning service. So response options, and remember there's no bracket there, so it will be just one option. So there will be Amazon Transcribe, Amazon Poly, Amazon Translate, and Amazon Textract. And here, things to keep in mind is what is the fundamental purpose. And if you haven't heard about these before, if you haven't been into a session that will talk about these, I think this is good practice to do because these might repeat in different ways of asking a question. So in this context, the correct answer will be Poly, but Poly, all of them are machine learning services, but Poly as a machine learning service is text to speech. So let's say you have a long written text. If you target Poly with that text, it will read it out loud. So in that context, it's an easy answer that this is the service that will do that. But what about the other services? So I think it's a good idea to go through them all to figure out what they actually do. There's this transcribe option. So transcribe is the service that does use machine learning, as mentioned, but it actually takes audio data and it moves it into text. So it's not text to speech, it's actually audio to text, so the other way around. What about the other options? Translate. So Translate is also a machine learning translation service, but it doesn't do text to speech, so it just does translate. And currently Translate, I might be lying, but so when I was studying for this exam, I checked like how many languages it's supporting. We are probably talking about approximately 40 languages, so there's quite a lot of languages that you can translate with this service. And keep in mind, you can always combine different services. So you can actually do transcribing, translating, and then Poly. So they can be also interconnected that way, that they follow each other. And then there was Textract. So It is also a machine learning service, but it extracts text from scanned documents. So basically, it's kind of a advanced version of OCR, and it doesn't do text-to-speech. But again, this can be in a chain of different projects that you use or different services that you use, so it can be combined with different kinds of machine learning services. But scan documents to extract text. What about identifying services for other in-scope? So basically, practitioner exam in-scope categories. How do you identify them? So a user needs to automatically discover, classify, and protect sensitive data stored on S3, so object data, object storage service. Which AWS service can meet these requirements? Here you see a repeating question that you often see and most likely will see in your exam. So let's look at the keywords. Automatically discover, classify, and protect. And there's usually a typical answer that you will see in each of the exams that you will be doing. The question can be a bit different. You might, for example, see a question that, how do you identify personally identifiable information on S3, or let's say payment card information on S3? Very similar question. So the question format might be a bit different, but it handles the same thing. So a user needs to automatically discover, classify, and protect sensitive data stored in S3. So then when you have different services, you have Amazon Inspector, you have Macy, you have Guard Duty, and Secrets Manager. And the reason I'm saying that it's repeating question, you will see this repeat also practitioner, associate, even professional level, and also specialties. So the repeating answer is Macy. And Macy is the correct answer. And let's look at what Macy does. So Macy is an automated security assessment service, and it helps to improve the security and compliance of an application deployed on AWS. It does a whole host of things. So it can actually find certain patterns on your S3 data, including personally identifiable data. It's these days also combined with different machine learning solutions. So it does a lot of stuff, and it allows you to assess and also that way discover, classify, and protect the data. Cool. If this is a repeating question, that's good to keep in mind. Why are the other options wrong? So what's wrong with Inspector? So Amazon Inspector, that is also an automated security assessment service that helps you improve the security and compliance of your applications deployed on Amazon EC2 instances. It doesn't do anything with S3 data classification or any kind of automatic discovery on S3. So it's kind of very close, but not the one that you would use for this purpose. What about the Guard Duty? Guard Duty is a threat detection service that continuously monitors for malicious activity, or let's say unauthorized behavior, to protect your accounts and workloads. But it doesn't do anything for the S3 data classification side. So it's more about what is a malicious activity pattern that you might protect against. And then last but not least, there was the Secrets Manager. So Secrets Manager allows you to do a lot of stuff that actually protects the secrets you need to access your application. So let's say that you have your encryption keys, you have your access keys, you need to rotate them. They would use Secrets Manager, but it doesn't do anything for your S3 data classification and that kind of automatic discovery of data. So that would be like extremely typical question option that you would see. So that is the domain 3. And then we have one more domain that we need to cover, and that is the domain 4, which is the smallest one. So it will be the billing, pricing, and support. And hopefully we have kind of a very traditional questions here. So let's go through them, and then we'll look at kind of the foundational way of how to prepare for the test, like registering and such. So domain 4, billing, pricing, and support. There's 3 main categories. So this is the smallest category of them all. And there will be, how do you compare pricing models? What are the resources for billing, budget, and cost management? And how do you identify the technical resources or any kind of support options that you have? So let's start with the first category, so the pricing models. And we have quite a short question, which is, which AWS service allows customers to purchase unused Amazon EC2 capacity at an often discounted rate? And the keywords here are purchased unused EC2 capacity and discount. Okay, so the options that we see, and it's only one that you can choose, is that you can see there's reserved instances, on demand, dedicated, and spot. And here you should think about like, what are the benefits of having reserved instances of, for example, guaranteeing a reservation of resources, or on demand being the fact that you can actually easily let go of resources if you don't want to use them. So it gives you the flexibility. Dedicated also on the lines of reserved instances of dedicated resources and access to those. And then you have spot. And if you remember when we talked about spot instances, they allow you to have a very deep discount of even 90% of discount, but they don't guarantee the availability of those resources like consistently and continuously. So you can have like a fleet of spot instances, meaning that there's spare instances to use for your calculation. So most likely the spot instance is correct in this answer key. So in a very fundamental level, how do you explain it? With spot instances, you can access unused EC2 capacity, kind of the overuse of the EC2 capacity, and then you will have a heavy discount. The flip side of things, what you need to keep in mind is that you are not guaranteed to have those exact machines or that fleet of machines for very long duration. So once you get a notification that those machines will disappear, you have like a 2-minute notice period. So that way, spot instance is correct, and it gives you a discount. Why is it not reserved instances? So with reserved instances, you basically reserve some capacity for your use at any time. And sometimes it can give you a discount because you're basically saying, I will use these machines for a dedicated time period from 1 to 3 years. But it's not unused capacity. It's reserved just for your purpose. So it's fundamentally something that you will use, and it's reserved for you. And then you can do cost savings by figuring out what is the term that you will be using it. On-demand instances, thing to keep in mind, that is always the default purchase option, and it's always immediately available. So once you click an EC2 instance, you start it, it will be immediately available. Fundamentally, it doesn't have any kind of cost savings plan. It is the on-demand instance price. But also when there are discounts applied, so if there's a new discount that we will tell you today that there will be a discount, you will get it automatically. So on-demand instance prices are automatically discounted while we introduce discounts. And then there was the last one, which is the dedicated instances. So dedicated instances run on like VPC hardware level, and it is dedicated to individual customers, and they are typically used, you see them being used like licensing and compliance constraints. So dedicated instances are not discounted, so they will actually add to your cost because they are dedicated just for that customer purpose. Let's look at the 4.2, which is the understanding resources for your billing, budgeting, and cost management. So this is also quite a long question. So you will have a question of each of your company's departments has its own independent AWS account and its own payment method. So somebody has a credit card, somebody has a billing method, whatever it is. And your company wants to and needs to centralize the departmental governance and consolidate the payments. So how can a company achieve these objectives by using AWS services or features? So the keywords being here, own payment method, and then also centralizing departmental governance and consolidate payments. let's look at the options. So you will see actually quite long options here. So you will see an A that says cloud map on each departmental account doesn't really ring through. Then there's a create an organization in AWS organizations with all features enabled within one account. Invite all accounts to join the organization. That sounds about right. Then you have systems manager, ops center, and cost and usage reports based on billing and cost management console. I would say B, but let's look at why is that the correct answer. So B is saying create an organization in AWS organizations. So keep in mind, the AWS organization provides you a centralized governance and billing for an AWS environment that is run by an enterprise. And you can have multiple accounts and you can enroll multiple accounts into that organization. In this practitioner exam, you will not be asked very complex questions around it. If you go to associate or you go to like a specialty exam, you might see questions that like broaden the topic of going to how do you onboard multiple accounts and what are the limitations of onboarding them. You don't need to know those when you're going into the practitioner. Why are the other options wrong? So the cloud map. So the cloud map actually creates and maintains a map of backend services. So it doesn't do anything for your governance or your payment consolidation. So it's kind of beside the point of that question. Then there was systems manager ops center. So the ops center is a central location for the IT professionals to view, investigate, resolve any operational work items, and it doesn't do anything for billing. And then there's still the incorrect option of cost and usage reports, because this might sound correct. So using cost and usage reports based on the billing and cost management console. So this solution does consolidate the billing in a report, but it will work only if you, so for the individual account. So without that cross-account billing option. So it doesn't address the central governance of your whole organization. So it does give you that report, but not across accounts. And then we have one more, and that is the identifying technical resources and support options. So let's go through those, and then we will summarize a bit, and then I will open up for questions. So this is a category that you will probably see 1 or 2 questions in. So you won't see a lot, but you will see some. So let's take a typical question. What is the minimum AWS support plan that provides technical support through phone calls? So you can pick up your phone and call the support center. So minimum support plan. So what is basically the most cost effective that you can still get the support through a phone? So let's look at the options that we have. So you see enterprise, business, developer, and basic. And here, a couple of things. Multiple of these might actually include the option to have that phone support, but because there's no bracket behind the question mark, so it will be only one. So it's the one that is the cheapest option. And here it would be business. And I know that many people who know the support options might easily say, yeah, enterprise has that option available. Yes, it does, but it's not the cheapest. So business, you can call or chat with technical support by using your business support plan or your enterprise support plan. So the business support plan is the minimum plan, the cheaper plan that provides this feature. So the reason why enterprise is wrong is that it's not the minimum plan, but it does include the option. Then again, developer plan, you can do email creation of support tickets, but you can't raise them by phone. And then there's also the option of basic. So that's basically a plan that provides you customer support for non-technical issues. So let's say you need to raise a service quota, but it doesn't provide you with technical support. So that is all for the question styles and domains that we will cover today. A couple of things I want to cover with you so that you are mindful of those. So today you will get the access to get your vouchers to get your exam registered. But before you go and register for your exam, looking at the exam options, so read through and understand if there are keywords like not, or let's say the keyword of minimum or maximum in the actual question text, and identifying those key phrases and qualifiers. And if you can eliminate some options saying that is absolutely incorrect, please do so. That will make your life so much easier. And then when you have the remaining options, compare, contrast. So key phrases, qualifiers, also take the most likely answer. So you will not be led on purpose to a wrong direction typically. It's more about what makes sense, that you can identify those options that can be correct. If you feel like you're spending too much time in picking your best answer or best guess, flag the question. So put the tick mark on top of the question and continue so you can return to that. So those are my test taking tips for actually identifying what is the correct option. Then before I share the voucher access is that a couple of things when you're registering. Your voucher will support both style tests. So you can go to your on-premise center, so you can take that option. So that means that once you register, you say, I want to go and do the exam in a physical site. That's fine. But then, of course, you will search for that site on that exam registration site and choose the nearest site or more convenient site for yourself. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to go to a site, you can do it from home. But if you're doing it from home, keep in mind there are practical things. One is be very careful about keeping your desk clean. So you don't have to clean your desk once you start your exam, because they will ask you to clear all note-taking options, so you won't have pencils, papers, etc. on your desk. You can't have external screen connected, and also you can't have other people in the room. So if you would have somebody walking in your room, your exam will be disqualified. And trust me, that's quite easy to do. I have done it myself. So going on, for example, in summer house with family and somebody walks behind you and then your exam is disqualified, you will lose your certification voucher. Don't do that. So it's then money not very well spent. So it would be best if you can find a room where you can close the door and make sure that nobody walks in during the test. Also, if you happen to have a situation that somebody might pop by your house or something, that you might have a doorbell ringing, it will be really annoying if it keeps blaring at you on the sideline. So those things are good to keep in mind. The cost of the test is not different based on if you go on site or if you do it from home. So that is in essence the practice for the exam. How do you get your voucher? You can either scan the QR code, or I will also drop the link to the chat. Just a moment. You will see this also in Slack. So, hang on. So, this link will take you to the registration form that will eventually give you the certification voucher code. There will be a couple of questions. We will need your email in order to send you the code. We will ask you a question, will you need a certification voucher? Read it in ways of, yes, I will do my exam in a given timeline. The sooner you do it, the better. But the voucher is valid for 12 months. So my hope for you is that even if you still practice a bit, or if you repeat certain recordings, that's fine. But do it in a timeline that you wouldn't all of a sudden notice that it will go stale. Then there's a question, will you report on the exam results? Why are we asking this? The reason is that it helps us improve the program. Let's say you report that I didn't pass. We might actually ask you to share a bit more details on like which category, is there something that we could have provided you with more? Is it hands-on exercises? Is it recordings? What could have helped you? And also, I will make sure that those of you, if you see that you will fail or something will happen with your exam, we will aim to get you a second voucher or way to repeat your exam. But you need to provide us with those details that you didn't pass this time. So that's basically it. So this QR code will be available for you. Please register. We will share the codes via email. You will get different links for the reporting purposes of did you pass and when did you pass. So that's pretty much it for the exam prep. And yeah, let me open up for questions. So feel free to unmute yourself or drop in the chat questions that you might have. If there's no questions at the moment, don't worry. We will be available for you also on Slack, so you can ask questions in Slack. You will get the whole stack of slides for yourself to also prep for the exam. If you're watching this as a recording, don't worry, you will have access to the same registration. Actually, that's a really good question. What is the time limit for the exam? So when you look at the exam notes, you might get when it says that, hey, you have these many minutes, I think it's like 85 minutes, which is the kind of standard. If you don't speak English as your native language, you can actually get extra time. You can get 30 minutes extra for your exam. And how you get that, you can actually get it automatically approved by raising a ticket on the AWS certification site by saying, I would like to have the extension of 30 minutes for the basis of ESL, English as a second language. And once you have applied that, it will be automatically added to your exam. When you register, you don't automatically see that there. So you might still see the 85 minutes, and that's okay. Once you start the test, the 30 minutes is added to your this whole exam time. So sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes you don't need it. 65 questions is the typical number. I'm now seeing that there are new tests added, there's an AI foundational test coming up. They will have 85 questions, which is a bit odd because that's not very typical, but at least the site says there's 85. So in that context, 65 is what you can expect, and you need to pass around, I think it's 72% or let's say 70+%, and then you will pass. Yes, the previous slides and recordings, everything is available, and actually there will be a site that collects all of them. Also, the YouTube site collects all of them, and there will be all the recordings, all the slides. If you haven't yet taken part in Mimmit Koodaa Slack, you can do so, but now I don't have the link. If somebody has the link, they could drop it in the chat, or we can share it on the site.
I'll share it just a moment.
Yep. And I was thinking, could you share also the Amazon, like the main page, that then it has all the recordings also listed? Yeah, you can basically choose any date within 12 months. The only limitation is that if you would like to do it today, most likely then you have to choose something that is really inconvenient as timing. So sometimes when I want to do exam like right now, you will get a timing like midnight, and that's not very fun. But yeah, basically you can choose any time of the exam. Of course, if you're doing them on site, then it's the opening hours of the exam centers. If you're doing it from home, then it's 24/7. So there will be always availability. Do I need to? So there's basically what they are testing for is also that you will hit certain range in each category. I haven't really seen a situation where somebody would have failed one category only. So that's not really typical. So usually when you hit that over 70%, you won't have a issue. Yeah, so what they do in the home option, they will actually, you will have camera on. So you will have to have your camera on. You will check that before you start your exam. There will actually be personnel that will have access to that feed. So let's say you would walk away from your laptop, then you would be disqualified. So in that way, they monitor for certain things that would be unusual behavior. So, but they will do that automatically via the application. There are, but now I actually need to check which ones are still available. I know that the biggest ones have, of course, like Helsinki, Espoo, Vantaa have been the ones. There has been Turku, Oulu, I think Jyväskylä and such. But let me check and we can share that because that has been changing quite a lot. And what somebody said to me was that, was it Turku maybe? That even though there's a test center, but it was so rarely open that it was not very useful. So that might be the case, but let me check if I can find that link for you. Let me see if I have covered. With the online class environment, so basically what you can do, there is a kind of a cloud practitioner test environment that you'll do in a gamified environment. There's some practical hands-on things that you can do there. If you want to use free tier account, you can. If you would decide to do the exam a bit later on, let's say in the autumn, then you will also have access to the immersion day labs from our side. We haven't planned an immersion day lab before we get to our summer holidays, but we will kick off the new trainings when we get to autumn. That's a good question. How can we get access to more question sets to practice for the exam? I use udemy.com, so dropping that in the chat. The question sets are not very expensive. So typically like $7, $8 or something. And typically you get 6 question sets per exam. So let's say 65 question sets. So there's a lot of question sets. In Udemy, there's a lot of people who offer those. Look at their ratings. So if you have people who have very high ratings for the exam sets, they are usually very solid. So they are very good. So that is something I can recommend if you want to have like more access to more diverse question sets. Yeah, I think that is pretty much it. I will check for those couple of links. I will share the slides. Millie has the link. And yeah, if I can find the schedules for other cities also for the on-site exams, I will share that. But hey, thank you everybody for spending your time today doing exam prep. And yeah, let us know how you did. We will share you the exam vouchers and also let us know once you pass your exam. Thank you so much.